Keep your drinking hand strong, everybody. Today, we're playing Einhander, and this is Drinking Games. Drinking Games is a semi-regular feature here on Videotron 2000, where I play a game I've either never played before or just haven't played for a very long time, while at the same time drinking a beer I've never tried before and trying to see just how many of them I can get through while I do it. In the true spirit of a drinking game, each game has different rules dictating when I should drink, and the trick is to see just how far I can make it before the whole thing becomes a big mess and I make a total idiot out of myself. For this first video installment of Drinking Games, I went with Einhander, a game I sort of remembered playing as a kid. Released in 1997 for the original PlayStation by Squaresoft back when they were their own company and sometimes made games that weren't RPGs, Einhander is a shoot-'em-up in the vein of R-Type or like half of the early Genesis library that offers the 2.5D approach of other PlayStation-era games like Klonoa, bringing a sense of depth and dynamism to the game that 2D shooters simply couldn't pull off. I definitely remember renting it a couple of times back in the day, and I also remembered really enjoying it, although it's safe to say I haven't touched it in the 20 or so years it's been since its release. And the typically relentless pace of the game, combined with my lack of familiarity with it, made it a prime candidate for me to try playing it while drinking. Spoiler alert, it does not go well. However, the upside to all this is that I happen to pick a pretty darn good beer to go along with it. The beer I'd chosen for this inaugural episode is Longboard Island Lager by Kona Brewing Company. The fun island theme is something of an ironic choice given the frozen wasteland that Michigan usually is this time of year, but this stuff was delicious all the same. During my pre-game taste test, it almost reminded me of a drier Stella Artois. Very crisp, a little dry with a mildly bitter finish, but not enough to ruin the experience or make you thirstier afterwards, and light enough that you can have a few of them without it turning into some kind of gross light dad beer. I could see it pairing well with a meal, or just something you enjoy a few of without having to switch to something else later like you run into with heavier beers. And considering how I had to try to drink a lot of them very quickly while playing video games, the mellow taste and fresh, drinkable texture was frankly perfect for my purposes. Even if you're not trying to show people how bad you are at shooters, I fully recommend it for anyone who's into a nice lager or just needs something a little more mellow. Of course, if you're one of those people that only drinks IPAs, you probably won't like it because it doesn't taste like pine cones. But me, I liked it. But enough beer talk, on to why we're all here, to watch me drink and play video games. The moment-to-moment gameplay in Einhander isn't vastly different from traditional shooters with one-hit deaths and switchable weapon pickups, so I felt it best to write the rules around the idea that I could die at any second. 1 drink for any normal death, 2 drinks if a boss kills me, or if I happen to get killed on an obstacle in the level itself, which isn't quite as impossible as you might expect. Additionally, the game judges you on how many enemy ships you destroy in a certain time period, tracking your progress with a small combo meter. While this didn't actually seem to affect gameplay, I wasn't one to ignore an excuse to drink, so I decided to add this to the list as well. I started off optimistically enough, but that's probably because I was still sober at this point. But even with as sober as I currently was, none of the descriptions of the game's 3 selectable ships actually meant anything to me, so I picked the Endymion both because it said it was easy to fly, and the name reminded me of Tuxedo Mask, and I have absolutely no problem admitting that. The first level in Einhander seemed to take it pretty easy on you at the start, at least when compared to other classic shooters that already start off pretty insane and just get worse from there. The enemies came in predictable waves that were telegraphed nicely by the game's multi-layered graphics, which both gave me a nice heads up when I was about to get attacked by the space police, and frankly just looked nice, even considering how poorly a lot of PS1 games hold up these days. I even managed to do okay getting around these inconveniently placed neon signs that every future dystopia seems to love, a section of the game that I'm gonna go ahead and assume gave me a really hard time as a kid because I was already bad at video games at 10 years old. Yes, the first level seemed to be going very well, and I had high hopes for the rest of the game, but that was before I ran into the first boss. Pride goeth before the fall, as they say, and the source of much of my early drinking was this Evangelion-looking jerk. Maybe it was just my lack of familiarity with the game, but I felt like I was having a really hard time interpreting any of the boss's weak points, and this got me into trouble a little more than I would have liked. And this just led to more deaths, which led to more drinking. And on it went until I managed to finish an entire bottle before the end of the first level. It wasn't my proudest moment, but I guess it also wasn't the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to me while I've been drinking. But onward I struggled, through each death and each refreshing sip of beer until I finally put this purple jerk to bed. And after that, things got a little better. I was getting the hang of enemy behavior, I was learning which of the sub-weapons were shitty and which ones weren't, and I was feeling pretty good about where things were going. I even got to have a short fight over a freeway, kinda like in Mega Man X. And everything seemed like it was pretty cool, until I ran into this thing. This totally awesome looking dinosaur Constructicon thing announced its presence with some garbled spoken gibberish and a skewed camera angle, which I would love to blame for my difficulties in trying to fight it, but I can't kid myself here. I held my own at first until he revealed what I can really only describe as being a butt laser. And, of course, I flew right into it. I will say the kind of cool thing about Einhander is that the game's bosses take a little more thinking than your usual shooter enemies. Instead of the screen-filling bullet hell nightmares you get in some 2D titles, your enemies in Einhander tend to have slightly more specific weak points and movement patterns, requiring you to think a little more strategically than just dodging a lot of blue and yellow blobs. Of course, the occasionally spotty hit detection doesn't make things any easier. I am totally not taking responsibility for this one. What I will accept the blame for, however, is me not paying any attention to the start of the fight. Thanks to my stupid rules about when I had to drink, I kept finding myself in the perfect position to get squished by his stupid head claw thing. Which, of course, leads to more deaths, which, of course, led to more drinking. And so on, and so forth. But eventually, I figured out what I had to do, and I defeated him. And as this chicken walker died kind of a pitiful death right there in front of me, I maintained my sense of inebriated pride. The second level approached with a mercifully slow start, probably because there was nothing waiting right at the beginning to kill me. Instead, I was greeted with a fairly eerie landscape and a very fast-moving weapons train. Kinda like that part in Star Fox 64, except without any cute animals encouraging me to do my best. All I had was my wits and some delicious beer, and I could feel even that was slowly beginning to betray me. We could say my reflexes weren't quite what they used to be. And I found myself on the receiving end of some pretty embarrassing deaths. Relatively speaking, I hadn't even had that much to drink yet, but the beer was starting to catch up to me and I could feel myself, slowing down, let's say. Eventually, I worked my way back over to that train that I assumed I had to stop, and things started going slightly better. The waves of enemies were more persistent than they were before, and the introduction of these little baby armored core looking robots didn't help things, nor did the little can-shaped ones that kind of looked like the bad guys from the old Felix the Cat movie. You know, the one with the scary robots. Of course, my confidence was unearned, and the rest of the level went about how you would expect. Specifically, this segment taking place directly over the train would prove to be a massive stumbling block. I could try to blame a lot of things. I can blame the onslaught of enemies. I could blame the fact that there were an awful lot of guns on board this train. But mostly I should blame the fact that I was a giant, drunken idiot. And it was right around here I realized I was about to start my third bottle, which is both impressive and depressing when you remember that I'm still in the second level. But even through all this, I could feel a second wind coming on. I actually managed to survive this entire gauntlet, and then I was off and headed for greener pastures. I'm sorry, did I say greener pastures? I meant pointy, rolling death cars. After reflecting for a bit on how this thing looked like some of my favorite Transformers when I was a kid, I found myself in some pretty deep doo-doo. Ah! So whoever this car jerk was, it was a heck of a lot faster than I am. And it seemed to be impervious to my brilliant strategy of flying right into it to see what would happen. As a matter of fact, this brilliant strategy had led me to a reminder of my own drunken mortality, and I found I only had 1 continue and 3 lives left. All of which I promptly blew. This meant the worst possible thing. 3 beers deep, having to start all over again.
There was a time in the era of great chaos when the earth...
If you ever want to play this game in front of people, kids, I recommend that you do it sober, because this has gone very poorly for me. But in the face of defeat, I grabbed one last drink and gave it one more shot. Like one of those bad dreams where you're back in high school, I could see it all starting over again. From the Blade Runner-style floating cop cars, to the maze of neon German advertisements, even to that purple thing in the middle of the level that I really wasn't looking forward to fighting again. But, luckily, my suffering would be over with quickly. I even managed to get back to the Chicken Walker, but after 4 beers and about an hour of abuse at the Hans of Einhander, I just couldn't keep doing it. You know, I think if I stop now, I'll be able to stop embarrassing myself. It was going to be a rough morning, the kind that would take an awful lot of eggs and hot sauce to fix. But on the plus side, at least I got to play Einhander, right? So if there's one lesson I want you to take away from all this, kids, don't drink and fly spaceships, or anything. So how did I do? Let's round down and say I finished about 3.5 beers, which meant I only finished about 1.5 levels. Not my best showing, but in my defense, this game was really hard and I'm kind of a weenie. Luckily, the beer was delicious, so the whole thing wasn't a total wash, and sometimes that's all I can ask for. For Videotron 2000, I'm Tim, and this has been Drinkin' Games. Cheers.